Hello, welcome to the next edition of Competitive Magic. This is going to be the last Competitive Magic Pub series, of course, before the brand new set drops. So that comes out tomorrow on technically quote unquote today on MTGO. Depending on when this airs, it's either going to be yesterday or today. I don't know. But I wanted to go ahead and cover the last few the decks that I thought were sweet, making its way up to it. Now, there could be improvements in these shells with brand new cards if you like. But right now, like I said, I'm covering as is. You know the series goes. So right today, I got 6 lists to close the season out. Each of which I think have a interesting piece that makes me want to play the deck. Sometimes it's just as simple as they play a pet card of mine. That excites me. So keep in mind the criteria on what I call competitive sweet list could alter, I guess, your opinions on it. But so I think one of those decks fit that criteria. Don't judge me. So make sure if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification so you'll be alerted for future videos. Let's get to 1,000 subs together and let's get into the 6 deck list. So first on my list is a mono red deck. It's relatively budget friendly. Most of the mana or the expense comes at the cost of your lands, right? Den of the Bugbear, Sakasan, probably your more expensive cards. Bone Crusher Giant. I believe I've seen, yes, you have 3 copies of Bone Crusher in the list. So like those are your more expensive cards, which they're staples in Pioneer. So you can't really argue. I also Eidolon, Soul, Scar Mage also I think are relatively higher on the price point, but these are all cards I think if you cross against any other red deck, right, they're kind of universal staples, so having them in your collection is a good idea. Twistspear, Mage, Eidolon, Godric is pretty sweet, which is one of the key reasons why I like this list. It's also interesting that it's playing Monstrous Rage, only a couple copies. So we have a little bit of extra reach also with Play with Fire and Lightning Strike. We have a couple Karizevs, which helps Brock Celebration. So if you Karizev on 2, you play Godric on 3, attack with Karizev and Godric, it becomes a 4/4 flyer, which is quite nice. We have Goblin Chain Roller to deal with pesky elves, so that's pretty good. Kamuna is always one of the better 1-drops. So either in this deck, you want a Kamuna on 1 or Soulscar Mage on 1. So that's pretty nice little stuff going on there. But other than that, so sideboard wise, we have Alpine Moon for the Lotus Field matchup and the Mono Green matchup. So that's the key advantage you get for Alpine Moon, even though it's a lot harder, it's a lot easier to deal with when it comes to Lotus Field, because it does enable basically Beseiju every single time. So like it does make it a lot easier to blow it up. But it is 1 mana versus 2, so that is something very important. So like in that matchup, we probably end up honestly just cutting the Hazards for him, right? Because we don't really need Hazard against Mono Green or Lotus Field matchup. Also, Bone Crusher Giant's kind of mid against the Lotus Field matchup, but that might not be the card you would cut. Chain Whirler also is kind of mid in that matchup, so there is definitely some options I guess you could take out. Also, we have Volley for the white, blue, and Greasefang matchup. In that case scenario, you would probably just take out some less interactive cards. You might even take out the Monstrous Rage. They're not really necessary against something like Greasefang. But against something like blue and mono white, you might want the actual heavy amounts of reach that card provides. So then we have Hearst as our graveyard hate against Greasefang. Also against like Phoenix, which is one of the best decks in the format right now. You also could bring that in. Again, I'm not really sold on Hazard in that matchup. That's like a top end. It's great against like mid-range, but it's not necessarily needed against something like Phoenix or Greasefang when you're trying to actually just beat them as quickly as you possibly can. And you can't really be slow against Greasefang because they'll just recover fast enough. We also have two Kari Zeds for the mono green matchup, traditionally in Gruul boats most likely, just because they have beefy fat creatures. We could probably bring those in as well in that matchup. Eidolon is kind of okay-ish. They do have a decent amount of 3-drops and 1-drops. So I don't necessarily know if you would cut that. You wouldn't cut the giant because it's so critically important to answer the elves on turn 2. So it might just be something as simple as cutting the Kari Zevs, even though that does increase your curve. Or also it could be Hazoret. I mean, Hazoret feels like it's a flex spot in this deck. We have two Chandras. This time you would not probably cut Hazoret because that matchup that Chandra's probably coming in for is control or it is mid-range. Hazoret is the king in those situations. So, like, more likely you'll end up cutting your Chain Whirlers. They don't really do anything, right? Because they're most of the threats are 3/2s from Harvester. Dread Knight, also a 3/2. Glissa is a 3/3. So, like, a lot of the threats don't really care about 1 damage. So you probably could trim down on all the Chain Whirlers. Go up 2 Chandras. Go up a Roast. Down 2 Rages. Go up to Roast against mid-range, right? Because we expect Shieldred. So Roast is for that matchup most of the time. And it's nice to be able to have reach with Chandra. Then we have the Elder Dragon War. This is more for your aggro matchups. So like Boros Convoke, right? So if they have a very explosive start, 2 damage should be able to deal with their board. Again, Hazoret probably is the card you would cut for that matchup. It kind of feels right too because you're cutting a 4-drop for a 4-drop. So it kind of works out pretty well. So I think that's actually where you kind of want to be. I don't think there's any other matchup where Elder Dragon War comes in. You're mainly playing it for the Wrath mode and getting the upside of also potentially having, a 4/4 and maybe looting away some dead cards. So that's essentially mono red for Pioneer. Let me know what you guys think of this list. All these lists, like always, will be in the description, along with my link to my Discord channel if you want to join it. And let's get into number 5 on my list. Number 5 on my list is the deck that I was talking about earlier, where it's playing my pet card, so I think it's sweet. Now, you could definitely at me, I guess, but it is playing Nicol Bolas the Ravager. If I was playing black and blue together, most likely it's got to have Nicol Bolas in it. I'm not really a fan of just pure Rakdos. It's kind of boring to me. Mardu is, I guess, okay. It's just very unrepresented in the Pioneer format, so it's not as bad, I guess. But when it comes to the 3 color combinations with black and blue, I guess John Delsa is pretty nice. So I guess I can't. Those 2 are the toss-up colors combination. So I'm excited to see Nicol Bolas in the list. Not sure about the Hostage Taker. I feel like that should be a sideboard card. If you already have Nicol Bolas kind of filling that same slot number in the, the turn sequence. But this deck has been pretty stationary for the most part of the amount of cards of each, right? It always seems to have 4 carry. It has 4 Omnaths, 4 Chains. 2 Up the Beanstalk has been pretty stationary. Surprisingly, there's not an extra Up the Beanstalk on the side. Instead, they're playing more Bank Busters. So that's their extra draw piece. We have 1 event to get with the BTL to get against green, so that's pretty important. Escape to Wilds is kind of the BTL target that if you're trying to grind your opponent. So against mid-range, against control, that's what you would be doing. We have Elishnorn to get with Bring to Light for the mirror. Also, it's good against, the mirror because of Leyline Binding, Chain to the Rocks. You kind of want to stop these effects. And it's always nice to have her main, right? Just because you can tutor it. Play a Binding, eat 2 things. It's a pretty good feeling. We have, of course, the pieces at the top that are always in these lists. Valky and Griffweaver. These are just kind of, you always get them with BTL for the backside. But if you ever have to play the front side, I guess they're okay. And then you have Fable the Mirror Breaker because it's the best reg card in Pioneer. So there's that. Breaking down these matchups. So against mono blue and spirits, mono blue slash Greasefang slash mono white, you kind of want a very similar strategy against most of them, right? You're trying to kind of control the board state earlier in the game as they try to basically combo out. Now, I don't think Elish Norn is needed in that matchup, right? Because either one of those matchups. So you probably would cut her, to be frank. You also could cut up the Beanstalk, but I feel like that's just a little off. You probably don't need Nick a Bolas. Sadly, I'm suggesting cutting it. But also probably 1 BTL, right? So 3 should be enough for 5 drops. I wouldn't go any more than that. You want to keep Hostage Taker because it's still technically a removal spell. So against those aggro matchups, we don't play any other Wraths on the board. I guess we do have one more EE. You could bring that EE in as well. That is also a possibility. But that's what you would do against like Mono White, Greasefang. Not Greasefang, right? Greasefang, you would actually not play the events. Events are more for also against Mono Green. If we are facing Mono Green, you would of course bring in the events and the 2 strokes. That should be all that you need in that matchup. Your worst case scenario match cards in that matchup, you definitely want to keep the chains, the bindings. Escape to the Wilds is not necessarily needed, so you could trim a Escape, a Norn, and one other random card. I don't think you want to do it the Beanstalk. Hostage Taker is okay. It's like maybe a BTL, kind of weird, but you definitely want the strokes because it can answer Cab, it can answer Karn. Also, it answers, Storm the Festival. So it answers a decent amount of their cards. Now, against something like Control, you have something like Dovin's Veto. Also, against Lotus Field, right? Because that also is a decent matchup card for that matchup. You could also do Stroke in that matchup too. It's because Pour Over Pages is so potent. Ultimatum. So like you could argue that Stroke is okay in that matchup. And you probably would bring them in because Chain of the Rocks and Binding are kind of bad cards. So you probably end up cutting the Chain of the Rocks first for the strokes and the vetoes against something like Lotus Field. Binding at least still hits Chandra, so you may contemplate keeping that card in your deck. But you could also cut it for like Rest in Peace to stop like the Chandra loops as well. But you also have, like I said, we have Rest in Peace in the board for mainly Greasefang and Phoenix. Against Phoenix, you probably also would bring in Veto and maybe Event, right? Just because those are the cards that actually help. One exile the Phoenixes, but the Event does, and Volley, right? Volley also come in some numbers, probably a low amount, just because it does answer uncounterably Thing in the Ice, which actually is a pretty powerful card. But they might sideboard that out. Against mid-range, we have Bankbuster. That's pretty much it. And Scarab God, most likely. Scarab God probably just comes in and replaces Elish Norn. They don't really have a lot of ETB triggers, other than, I guess, the blood tokens that Harvester makes. That you could argue, of course, for that. But you probably just cut Scarab God the Elish Norn for the Scarab God. And then you would bring in the Bankbusters. Now, and for the Bankbusters, you probably want to trim on Chain to the Rocks. That seems okay. Hostage Taker probably comes out. So probably 1 Taker, 2 Chains. Because you definitely want to keep the Binding because it's instant speed. It hits everything in their deck. Chain of the Rocks also is okay, right? Just because it can answer a Shieldred. But at the same time, you kind of want the card advantage more. And like I said, Scarab God is just a better late game threat than Elish Norn because it can never really die. So that's very important. So you also could argue that you can cut the Glyph Weaver for the Bankbuster. Yeah, maybe you do Glyph Weaver, Taker, and then you cut maybe a 1 Chain to the Rocks. Because you do want to keep as many as you possibly can. So that's what I would do against Rakdos mid-range. That is 5-color mid-range. Like I said, let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about these lists. And if I butcher some of these suggestions, let me know down in the comment section so I know for next time what not to say. So let's get into the third deck on my list. So next on my list is a Rakdos Sacrifice deck. Normally I don't find these very interesting, but this one happens to be an Anvil deck, which does make it interesting. So we still have the same pieces: Harvester, Epic here, Fable, no Fable. Okay, so it's not the same pieces, I guess. We have Sir Ginger, which also makes this kind of interesting, right? So we sacrifice things, keep making Sir Ginger bigger. We have the cat loop, of course, to also help facilitate our sacrifice-based strategies. Ironically, we are not playing Mayhem Devil. I don't know if that seems right or not. We have Blast, though, which is really good to be able to sacrifice an artifact, deal 5 to something, 3 pushes, because it's very easy to have it become a revolt. Synthesizer, because it's an excellent card advantage piece that you just sacrifice for free with the Anvil, make a 1/1, dig a card deeper. So, like, we have Deadly Dispute as well to Synthesizer, sacrifice basically anything we kind of want to, right? And we get to sort of ramp, pseudo ramp, which also, and again, helps Sir Ginger. So I think this is actually a deck that is built to maximize Sir Ginger, which is something that really hasn't showed up in Pioneer at this current moment. So that's kind of interesting. Sideboard, like, so against decks like Control, mid-range, you probably want to consider Thoughtseize potentially, especially against Control, where Fatal Push is bad, so you immediately cut Fatal Push. And then you probably also want to cut the Meathook Massacre for 4 Thoughtseizes. Cut the other Meathook Massacre for Obnixilis. Looks like we have 2 Obnixilises. The last card you can cut, maybe you cut an Epicure or a Glare? Okay, yeah, you definitely would cut this Glare. Exile target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. But relatively speaking, you probably want to keep one of these. It's better than push because they do have planeswalkers. Meathook Massacre is dead. Cut a Glare, cut 3 pushes, up Thoughtseize, up 2 Obnixilises, and you're good. If you're looking for a little bit more creature removal, we have Eaten Alive. It also does planeswalkers, but you know that's definitely an option. You could also trim Fatal Pushes for more planeswalker removal if you need it. And this is more for the aggro matchup, where you could definitely maybe trim a Dispute and a Kroxa, something like that. Kroxa is actually a nice finisher, though. For a little bit more removal. We have Binding for the Phoenix matchup and the Greasefang matchup. Greasefang, and you would not really cut Fatal Push because you need to be able to answer the Greasefang at instant speed. We do have Glare, which is sorcery speed, so you probably could cut that, and the Meathook Massacre. Both of these cards I feel like are not great against either one of those matchups. And you bring in the Vlayland of the Void. You have 3 Damping Spheres for the Lotus Field matchup only, so keep that in mind. 3 pushes probably comes out. They don't really do anything. Also, you would bring in the 4 Thoughtseizes, go down the 2 Glares, 2 Meathook Massacres, and you're good against Lotus Field. So that is Rakdos mid-range. Rakdos Sacrifice. And I think this deck is actually pretty awesome. Like I said, I'm excited to see that Anvil is finally seeing some play in Pioneer. But it got a 5-0, so it has to be at least a semi-competitive list. So if you're a fan of Anvil, pick it up, try it out. Let me know how it goes down in the comment section. Let's get into the next deck on my list. So next is a combo deck that has been has its up and its downs, right? Since it's been in the Pioneer format. We have, of course, the new Brave the Wilds, along with Commune the Spirits. And then we have Caryatid as a way to hexproof. That we just keep untapping, cast our spells as we try to combo off with the Jeskai Ascendancy. The deck now has the backbone, I believe, of the new land. I guess this build doesn't play the new land. So now this deck is living on the backbone of Brave the Wilds, where it turns their rebargain, get the 3/3 land, make it become a 3/3. And then, of course, we have the best setup pieces with Consider, Sleight of Hand, Opt, Treasure Cruise to help dig and find our win cons. We have Dragon Mantle as a way to sacrifice it to the bargain. Then we have a Commune to help dig for our growth, and Jeskai Ascendancy and Mantle. These 2 are good to bargain away. Keep that in mind when you're making sideboard changes, that if you decrease your ability to Brave the Wilds too much, you're going to have a hard time being able to combo off. Against something like Mono Green, you might want to bring in the Pithing Needles. And I think the first thing you always want to consider cutting is, for one, this Crash Through. It's probably the worst card in the deck, but it's still better, still good enough to, if you cast it in game one, you're not going to feel ashamed of yourself. So probably cut a Crash Through for a Pithy Needle. And of course, the next card I think you would cut is an Opt. Opt is probably the worst of these three. So Commune you kind of have to keep because Jeskai Ascendancy is such a potent card in this deck. Now against aggro decks, we have Portable Hole. We could of course cut Crash Through and an Opt, and that seems like that should be fine against bar class, aggro decks, stuff like that have a lot of low costing permanents. We have Silence, probably for Lotus Field, since we don't have anything here at all for it. And it's not bad, right? You could make it where they can't combo off on their turn and then just kind of continue. Also, it protects you against mid-range and control, right? So you could cast this on your turn in those two matchups, along with Surge of Salvation for the mid-range matchups. This helps you when you're trying to go off, combo off. You can prevent your stuff from being interacted with or countered. So that's where this card really shines. And again, I think, of course, you would Crash Through first. You have 6 mana dorks. I don't think you ever want to go down on that count. One thing else I should point out against aggro, you have these 2 witness protections. So that way you can trim down on the growths or the mantles, probably the mantles. So against those matchups, you could trim these 2, play these 2. So you could make their stuff small, and then while you're trying to set up for the finish, and then once you can finish, you just sacrifice the protection to Brave the Wilds and then try to go off. Exit. So we have Silence, Surge. Surge is great against Thoughtseize turn 1. Silence is great, of course, like I said, against preventing your opponent from comboing off on their turn or preventing you from comboing off. Surge also kind of helps with that with Thoughtseize, but outside of that, it's probably not necessary. Also, it's good because your lands become hex-proofed, which against black and red removal, so that helps protect you as you combo off, I guess, as well. But it's not great against blue-white control. So we probably ended up, like I said, cutting Crash Through is always first. Since we're not replacing any kind of enchantments, I would start targeting the Ops. Like I said, these are just good, and you don't want to go down your enchantments. And unless you're expecting Graveyard Hate, you would never cut back on Treasure Cruise. Now, if you are expecting Graveyard Hate, you could definitely bring in a Terror Sunder, cut, another Opt or whatever. So we do have 2 enchantment removals for Rest in Peace, so keep that in mind. This is also for Shieldred, because we do draw a lot, so it's very important to remove it. And then we have 2 Mystical Disputes for the control matchup with the Silences. Then, of course, we have Jangatha as a companion. That is 4-colored Jeskai's Ascendancy. Hopefully I didn't just butcher that. I kind of went off of because there's so many complex levels we got to consider with the sideboard and what each dual functionality these cards actually have in this deck. Just because, it is designed in a way to where you could definitely see the overlap and where each card does, help. Let's get into the next deck, which probably is going to be worse for me for butchering, so might as well get into it. Next is 4-color Vannifar, which is built on the backbone of turn 1 Elf. Turn 2, you kind of want a Fauna Shaman or a Rona, and then you kind of want to get, if your Fauna Shaman dies, you can get under your Cauldron to give Mystic, and it's also nice if you can get a Prime Speaker underneath the Cauldron, so that way you could just kind of combo off earlier. And of course the combo is pretty simple. If you sacrifice an Elf, you get a Corridor, and then you untap whatever is the Prime Speaker. You sack the Corridor, get yourself an Extraction Specialist, get back the Monitor, back and forth. So you get all 4 of these, and you also get 3 Glasspool Mimics. And then at the very end, you get Player Recruiter with the last sacrifice on the stack, and you should be able to attack for lethal. So that is how the deck plays out. Tyvar is kind of a little bit of redundancy for Extraction Specialist when it comes to getting back your Corridor, which is really kind of important. Sideboard wise, we have Disdainful Stroke for the green matchup, also okay-ish against Rakdos. And they, for the most part, they are pretty decent are pretty effective at being costs. They're efficient, but you still get Shieldred if that's good enough. I'm not sure. But against green, you definitely would bring these in. Against control, you probably would consider them. You also have scavenging use for the graveyard hate that you could tutor for. I'm not even going to go into how this deck actually wants to tutor. I imagine Reflection Mage is the only, maybe Fauna Shaman are the only cards in this deck that I see that are expendable. Maybe also Elves against mid-range, right? Because you expect lots of removal. So you could definitely consider bringing Archon of Amirias, which Archon of Amirias is for the Lotus Field matchup. Also, Phoenix is pretty good against them as well, just because they do cast a lot of spells on a given turn. And if you could stop them from casting more than one spell, they'll never get back Phoenix. Then you have Leyline of the Void also. It's pretty good in that matchup. I'm not sure if you probably would I'm not sure what you would cut. Like, it's pretty tight. Like, each piece has a purpose in this deck. So I told you I was going to butcher it. Yeah, so if you're an expert 4-color Vannifar player, let me know down in the comment section. But I do like this deck overall. I think it's going to be a sweet addition to the Pioneer format. The more it's starting to get enfleshed and, have a defining deck list, the better I think it would be. So I think it's almost at that point. I'm not sure what pieces is missing. If you happen to know what pieces 4-color Vannifar would want, let me know down in the comment section. Let's go ahead and get into the last deck list on my list. So next on my list is a Pyromancer deck. So it's built around the back of Iconoclast, Pyromancer, and the extra threats we have is a Balmor, so that way we can make our 1/1 tokens kind of big. And then we have 2 Shredders, and that seems to be all of our finishers. So we have Consider, Sleight of Hand as our setup pieces. Spell Pierce is a good interaction spell to help protect our Pyromancer and Iconoclast, because they're very important to the actual game plan. We have 2 Lightning Axes. I'm not really sure why you would prefer this over another red removal based stuff, but because you don't really necessarily want to be discarding stuff in your hand. Impulse, still a decent removal spell. I'm not sure if this is better than the new one that has Bargain, but clearly this person favored this card because you don't have to necessarily get rid of a token to be able to go to the 3 damage, even though the Exile of Mode is quite relevant. Then we have 1 hazard as our extra land. We have some Meeting of the Minds and Treasure Cruise and of 1 Mind for the card draw effects. We have 2 Fading Hopes main in these Lightning Axes. I'm assuming to deal with Shieldred, because we do draw a lot of cards in a given turn, so we can't really take a lot of damage. And then we just beat down face with these tokens. Now, against matchups like mono white, blue base, and Fang, we want to definitely bring in volleys. In those matchups, you could 1-for-1 the volley and the hope, but you'd probably better off doing the Spell Pierces, to be frank. And then we have 2 strokes for the mono green matchup. Again, Spell Pierce. If you're on the play, you might want to play Spell Pierce, but if you're on the draw, I would heavily not play this card, especially since mono green don't really care about them interacting with your Pyromancer and Iconoclast. It's more to stop Karn, but it could it could definitely become out of place relatively fast against mono green, just because they do ramp. So they more likely can pay that 2 extra mana from Karn relatively fast in the game. So I probably honestly would just bring in strokes and take the 2 Spell Pierces, because Hope is fine to out-tempo them. Axe still, and Impulse and Hazard could still get the Elves, which is highly important to create tempo positive. You have 2 negates you could bring in with strokes against mono green if you really need to counter. Actually, that's probably what I would do. I'd probably bring in 2 strokes and a negate down the Spell Pierce and call it a day. I don't think I want the second negate, because they don't have a lot of targets for it, but their best hits are non-creature spells. Then against Greasefang and Phoenix, we could bring in 2 hearses. In that matchup, you still want to keep all this. I don't know if you would keep the Hope. So against Greasefang, you probably actually get Phoenix and Greasefang. You would bring in the volleys and the hearses, and that's it. Like I said, I would probably cut back on a Pierce 2 hope, and an extra piece, maybe Meeting of Minds. Seems okay. Against control, we have Mystical Dispute. Also, we have the Sieges, which is also pretty good against mid-range. Then we also have a Row, if we really wanted to try a different approach. But I think this is probably more from mid-range, right? Where you have an alternative way to win, when they most likely will just push your Iconoclast and Pyromancers to death. Keep that in mind. We have a Forge here. Also, it could potentially fill a similar role when you expect your key pieces to be easily interacted with. And then we have a Braid as a way to kill small creatures, also deal with artifacts. That is our last deck. So is it Pyromancer for Pioneer? What deck of these are you guys most excited for? Let me know down in the comment section. Before you head out the door, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so we get to 1,000 subs together. And until next time, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Don't forget, next week is starting the brand new content with LCI. We have gates coming out of the woodworks. Also, like we have we have a decent lineup for the first week. Even though we're trying small cards like that are uncommons, that I think are actually playable uncommons. And then the week after, I'm hitting all the most important new archetypes that are coming out. A lot like the new Amelia combo. I'm going to be playing that on week 2 of the new season. So I wanted to make sure I hit all the cards and decks that have the most hype. But also next week, I gotta be Mimi. There is going to be 12 Maw. So if you like and you want to see Dread Maws, you should definitely check that video out. I imagine we're not going to have a good time when it comes to a record, but we're going to have a good time every single time we cast a Dread Maw. And yeah, so I'm so super excited about that. Until next time, hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.